Ayotte.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, when we have a visa waiver application, is that application cross-checked with both our terror watch list and our no-fly list?
Senator, yes, that application, the data in that application is run through multiple databases. And I should say the visa waiver program traveler is vetted on at a number of different points.
So
in the
beyond,
continuum.
okay, so you got terror watch list, no-fly list. I assume there's obviously our FBI criminal database that NCI, you know, the records keeping process for our criminal records. What other databases?
It is the watch list, the no-fly list, our law enforcement databases you have identified, and also other intelligence databases. And I can certainly provide, subsequent to this hearing, greater specificity on which of those databases is checked. But it's a full complement of databases.
So here's my question. When we look at the attacks that happened both in Paris, number one, and then subsequently in Brussels, my question is this. We know that many of the European countries, and in particular 4 countries, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, and Belgium, have actually received some of the greatest numbers of the foreign fighters that have gone back and forth between either Iraq and Syria. And my question is pretty straightforward. Either the Paris, those that we know were involved in the Paris attacks, or the Brussels attacks, were any of those individuals not on our terror watch list or our no-fly list, which is obviously a smaller subset of the terror watch list, or our other databases? Do you know the answer to that?
I do not. I would defer to our experts, and I will certainly follow up with you, Senator.
So this is a really important question. And the reason I think it's a really important question is we're only as good as the information that we have. And we can add additional questions on the visa waiver checklist, but we don't do an in-person interview with those that apply for the visa waiver program, correct?
We do not do a consular interview. That is correct.
I mean, it's a pretty large program with 38 countries involved. So we're not doing an in-person interview. We've added some additional questions, but it's really what comes in and what goes out that's most important to how valid how we're doing. So I think it's really important for this committee to understand, A, any of the individuals that we know have been identified that have been involved in Paris, that have been identified with Brussels. Were they on the terror watch list? Were they on any of our other databases? If not, then we better understand why not, and we better understand as we look at the countries of origin that we see if there are gaps in our information sharing. And the reason I ask it is because it's been pretty widely publicized, for example, that Belgium had very serious issues with their law enforcement capability here, as we know that information was shared from countries like Turkey about at least one of the individuals involved in the attacks that were not acted upon. And so would you agree with me this is pretty important for us to understand, because it's only as good as the information we have in terms of how this vetting happens?
If I may, Senator, this is absolutely an important issue. Whether or not an individual is on a no-fly list is not necessarily dispositive of whether our security vetting would prevent an individual who would pose a threat or danger.
Well,
to the
I would
United
agree,
States.
but we're more likely, if they're not on terror list, which is a broader list than no-fly. No-fly is a subset of terror. If they're not in at least terror, or they're not in our FBI database, or they're not in some of these other databases that we obviously can't discuss here, if they're nowhere, it's a lot less likely that we're going to discover them. Would you agree with me on that?
Senator, not necessarily.
Okay, why? Tell me why you think we're going to discover them.
If I may. So let's, and I'll keep it specific to the visa waiver program. The application that a traveler must complete is a very comprehensive application, and in fact, in our effort to strengthen the visa waiver program, that application has become even more comprehensive. And so we have picked up data of an individual traveler that is not necessarily in our databases, but we have picked up data about that traveler that has revealed information that has enabled us to deny that individual's ability to travel based on.
So let me ask you this. How many visa waiver applications are there? How many are in the program? How many people?
I would have to get you that data.
So I think it's important to understand that because, and how much individual investigation is done on each of those applications? So in other words, when I get an application, if I'm an investigator, how much follow-up is done on each application?
Senator, what I would appreciate is the opportunity to have our experts brief you in a classified setting as to how we address the extraordinary amount of information we receive on those applications.
Okay, so this is just what I'm trying to get at here. We know that there were deficiencies in Belgium. In the past, you know, I know that the Secretary is looking at countries of concern, but information sharing is the critical piece here for us to protect our citizens, whether they're in the visa waiver program or not. But in particular with this category of individuals, because they don't have to take the extra step to get a visa. And I think it would be important, whether it's in classified setting or not, that we understand, A, the individuals that were involved in Brussels and Paris, were any of them on any of our intelligence databases, number one? Number two, how many folks do we have actually in this visa waiver program? Number three, on a hard paper application, how many of those do we have the opportunity to actually individually investigate aspects of that application? So that's why the lists become important. That's why the intelligence databases become important, because presumably with the numbers, we can't individually investigate each application. So what worries me is that you have a significant, obviously, number of foreign fighters that have returned to these European countries, and the sharing of information with our allies is critical. It's also the critical piece to this, how effective our visa waiver program is. So I know my time is up, but I hope that we'll have an opportunity to really break this down so we can understand fully how thorough the vetting is in this program. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I seek your indulgence to
Sure,
make a
because
point?
I'm going to seek your indulgence next. Go ahead.
Because this is a very, very important point. Allow me to make a number of points. First, we vet every single application of a visa waiver program traveler, every single one. Number one.
And what does that vetting involve?
That involves checking against our databases, not only the name of the individual, but also pinging against our databases and our extensive holdings, all of the information that we collect through that application. And so sometimes the information that is of secondary importance, if you will, not necessarily pertinent to the individual, but pertinent to other individuals' identities whom we identify on the application, has proven to be quite material in our security vetting, and I could explore further with you in a different a classified setting, number one. Number two, the ease with which an individual might travel within from one European country to another, by way of example, is very different than the ease with which, or the difficulty with which, someone might travel from a European country to the United States. Our security protocols at last point of departure airports is extraordinarily robust, and we have multiple layers of security. And so the travel from one foreign country to another is not to be viewed as synonymous with the ability of an individual to travel from one foreign country to the United States specifically. Thirdly, there's a difference between a refugee, to give a particular example, being processed across a border from one European country to another, and what we consider and what we employ as our security vetting. The difference between the processing of an individual, the capturing of the biographic information, and allowing that individual to travel through within the European zone, ultimately to resettle there, is a very, very different process than our multi-tiered, rigorous screening of refugees here in the United States.
Well, Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your description, but that's why I want to know how many folks were in the database or not. And second, the refugee issue is obviously a separate issue versus I'm a citizen of Belgium, I'm in the visa waiver program. I'm not necessarily, unless we know someone's been, been back and forth, and how good our information is really important. So I'd also like to know how much we're able to get given the volume. I'd like to know what the volume is and how much follow-up, if we don't have someone on a database, are we actually able to do. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,